Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and today I wanted to share with you my thoughts on The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I wanted to share these thoughts with you because I have quite mixed feelings about this book. I don't think it's a great book, and I don't think it's an awful book, so I thought I would share that middling opinion with you all. The Poppy War is a dark adult fantasy set in a fictional country called Nikan, which is very heavily influenced by early 20th century China. In the novel, the country Nikan has a very, very long history of war within itself between different provinces that become united in the empire. But there's also a history of war with a neighboring country influenced by Japan. And the people of Nikan, the Nikara, are quite obsessed really with the history of war, different military tradition. A lot of their schools, a lot of their education really revolves around things related to war. The main protagonist of the story is a teenage girl called Rin, and she is from one of the poorer, more rural farming type provinces called Rooster Province. People from this province don't typically get to go onto different academies within the country, but Rin crams for 2 years. She doesn't sleep. She sacrifices a lot in order to study for this big test. So Rin aces this notoriously difficult test, and it comes as quite a surprise. She actually does so well on the test that she is able to get into the most prestigious of the academies. This early part of the novel, I'd say roughly the first third of the book, I thought was great. The stuff revolving around Rin's time in Rooster Province, her buckling down, making all of the sacrifice to do the test, learning about her background, and all of the stuff at the academy, all of that stuff I thought was really well done. I thought the world building was great. Everything at the academy was very compelling, getting to know the students and teachers there. I thought all of that stuff was really well done. I especially want to reiterate the world building during Rin's time at the academy. I thought it was so cleverly done because there's a balance in fantasy trying to give enough of a background, enough world building that that fictional place seems real, but not giving so much that it becomes just a slog of exposition and explanation that you have to get through. While she's at the academy, you get to learn about the world through the different classes she's taking, and it doesn't seem forced. It seems very natural for us to learn this way because you're learning in bits and pieces as she's going to combat classes, as she's going to history classes. You're learning about the history of the different wars. You're learning about the different provinces because she's meeting students from different provinces. So you're getting a feel for the world, and it just feels very organic how you're learning about it because Rin is learning a lot of this stuff too. While Rin's at the academy, she also starts to learn about lore, which is something that most people don't know much about in this culture, in this world. And she's learning about the spiritual world. And she starts to become very interested in harnessing that power of the spiritual world and how to get in touch with the gods and goddesses. And I would say that I liked Rin's character up to and including this point. When war breaks out in this book and all of the students at the academy are basically forced to leave school early to go participate in that war, this is where the book takes a sudden turn. Obviously, the tone shifts dramatically. What was a kind of fantasy campus novel turns into a war novel. The jarring nature of the shift in tone is warranted. I think it reflects how those students would have felt, how jarring it would have felt to go from this academic atmosphere to being thrust into the middle of a war that you're probably not prepared for. So I don't necessarily have a problem with the tonal shift, although I would have liked more at the academy because that part was so interesting and much more compelling than the rest. But what really caused a shift for me at that point was more so Rin's character. Rin's character at that point, it's not that she changes, because war can change people, and I think that is fine. But it wasn't so much that her character changed because of the war. It just felt more so to me like her character wasn't well realized, wasn't well thought out. Her character is very inconsistent. She changes her mind constantly. Not that that is always a bad thing. I think characters have changes of opinions, can change their minds, and it can be done well. But the way it was done here didn't feel like an internal struggle of trying to wade through the pros and cons of a situation and having this battle of wills for decisions you have to make. That's not what it felt like. It felt more like complete and utter revelations that would then get undone like 20 minutes later. We had no time for Rin to sit in her decision before she would change her mind back and forth countless times. So Rin is very torn between lessons that her teacher at the academy, the lore master, had been trying to ingrain in her, and the lessons that she is trying to take on board from her commander, essentially, in the war. These two people in Rin's life, both of whom she looks up to, have very different ideas about lore and about accessing the spiritual realm and how it can be used or abused. And that could have been very interesting, this balance of trying to use something potentially dangerous, how it could help your cause, but also how it could be misused or could cause harm, and Rin trying to deal with that. I love things where characters are forced into decisions maybe that they have no perfect outcome. And I think also having a morally gray character can be very interesting. But again, there didn't really seem to be the struggle. It was more so an inconsistency in character where she would 100% agree with her teacher and then 20 minutes later talk to her commander and think, oh no, you're 100% right. And then 20 minutes later think about something her teacher told her and say, oh no, he was right. But it didn't feel like a pull back and forth. It felt like a complete and utter revelation, and then the opposite complete revelation, and then back to the original revelation. Like, that just didn't work. And the character Rin being central to the story and having such an inconsistent and not well-developed character is really the biggest problem I had with the book, because I feel like the story didn't work with her at the center. But I did want to bring up one more thing about the book, because it's something that I haven't seen highlighted very much, and I think should be. And it's something that I also have very mixed feelings about. I have heard people mention that this is dark fantasy, that it's very violent, that it is very brutal. And all that is true, but I think simply saying, oh, this is very brutal, this is very graphic, that's not enough. I think people going into this need to know that there is a scene, or rather several scenes, I guess an entire section really, that deals with a massacre that's happened during this war, and it is heavily influenced. It's basically a recreation, really, of a real life event that happened, the rape of Nanking. What happened during that massacre includes some of the most horrific, some of the worst war crimes, the worst atrocities you've ever read, you've ever heard about. And this had me conflicted because I was very distressed reading it. And I don't think that books can't be distressing or should always downplay like the horrors of war. But when I say distressing, I mean I felt physically ill. And I read, if you're new to my channel or you're not familiar with my reading taste, I read a lot of horror and pretty violent things, and I can stomach that pretty well. What's in this book was, like I said, upsetting to the point of making me feel physically ill. I lost sleep while I was reading this book. It didn't take me long to realize, oh, this is supposed to be Nanking. And it made those passages extra difficult to read, knowing that they are based on things that happened to real people. And I hated reading it. And I'm not saying that you can't write about real life war atrocities. I think people should know about war crimes, should know about history, even when that history is very distressing. And I would have felt differently if this was in the context of a nonfiction. But it was in a fictional world, in this fantasy book, and I didn't like that. But I am conflicted because I don't think it's fair to say that fantasy or any fictional book can't use real life things, even very distressing things. And I feel hypocritical because I have enjoyed other books who have borrowed or used real life war, real life events as part of a fictional story. So is it fair to criticize this book for doing it with this particular event in history? And I think what it boils down to is the fact that if it was in service to better characters or in service to a better story, then maybe it wouldn't have bothered me so much. The author doesn't take that event lightly. I'm sure she was trying to do justice to that story, but I just can't help just not liking that it was included. And I think anyone who is interested in this book or this trilogy, I think should be aware that these scenes are in there because, like I said, it's not simply a borrowing a little bit of history. It is essentially an exact recreation of that massacre. So it is very specific forms of atrocity that are written in detail. And that's just something I think you should know if you want to pick up this book. So I would be interested to know your opinions on the Poppy War. I know it's very popular and that my middle of the road experience is not the norm. So I would love to hear your opinions of this book. Please comment below and I would love to have a chat with you. As always, thanks for watching and we'll chat soon. Take care.